Our film today begins with Layla, a woman in her 30s, who enters into a romantic relationship with her son's teacher. This happens because her husband has been neglecting her, making her find in the teacher what she feels is missing in her marriage. However, she eventually wakes up from this illusion, but it's already too late. The movie starts with a scene of Layla taking her son to school as usual. One day, Layla bumps into a man named Chris. At that moment, Layla apologizes to Chris because she hadn't seen him. Her son tells her that Chris is his art teacher. From that moment, Layla begins to get to know Chris better. Some details of Layla's life become clear. She has many friends with whom she always gathers and shares secrets. One day, while returning home, her husband Peter is packing his bags for a business trip. Layla starts to feel neglected by her husband due to his constant travels and lack of attention. She begins to suspect that Peter is cheating on her because he frequently stays out late during his travels. One day, the school called for a meeting with the mothers, where Chris, the art teacher, was explaining his methods for dealing with children to Layla's friends. At that moment, Layla's friend, Gina, expresses her admiration for Chris. The next day, Layla goes to pick up her son from school and meets Chris again. While her son plays near the art supplies, Layla notices the masks hanging on the wall. Chris explains the story behind these masks and their significance. As Layla's son plays, he accidentally knocks over some of Chris's art supplies. The boy is scared that Chris might punish him, but Chris reassures him, saying, "It's okay." Layla asks her son to wait in the car and starts helping Chris gather the supplies. Chris begins to flirt with Layla, touching her hand, which makes her feel embarrassed, and she quickly leaves the place. That night, Layla calls her husband Peter, but he doesn't answer, which increases her feelings of loneliness and suspicion of his infidelity. She is deeply saddened and suddenly hears the doorbell. When she opens the door, she's surprised to see Chris, who came to return her son's laptop. She notices that his shirt is wet from the rain, so she invites him inside to change his wet clothes. While inside, Chris notices Layla's sadness and asks her about it. She tells him that she's sad because of her husband's neglect and her suspicion that he's cheating on her. Chris listens attentively, and Layla makes him a cup of coffee. At that moment, Chris turns on some music, and when she returns, he asks her to take his hand and starts dancing with her slowly. Layla begins to cheat on her husband, but Chris suddenly stops and leaves the place. Later, her husband returns from his trip but stays for only one day before having to leave again, which frustrates Layla greatly. She begins to argue with him, trying to talk to him, but he doesn't have time to listen. A little while later, Layla starts hearing noises near her house, and suddenly her phone rings. It's a message from Chris, telling her that he left a note under her door. Layla goes to find a reservation card for a hotel room, realizing that Chris wants to have a relationship with her. At that moment, Layla wrestles with her thoughts and eventually decides to go to the hotel. As soon as she enters the room, Chris suddenly appears behind her, wearing a black mask. Layla feels frightened and orders him to take off the mask. Afterward, they engage in a romantic encounter. Layla feels so ecstatic that she falls asleep from the overwhelming joy and comfort. But when she wakes up, she finds that Chris is no longer beside her or in the room. She leaves the hotel quickly, feeling sad and regretting what she has done. Afterward, whenever Layla sees Chris at her son's school, she ignores him, and even when he sends her messages asking to meet again, Layla also ignores them, feeling deep remorse. At that moment, Peter returns from his trip, and Layla is very happy to see him. Things between them return to how they were before. One day, Layla and Peter are watching a movie when her phone rings. It's Chris calling. He sends her a message saying he urgently wants to see her, but she ignores it and continues watching the movie with Peter. The next day, Peter and Layla go to pick up their son from school. This is the first time Peter meets their son's teacher, Chris. At that moment, Layla feels anxious and uncomfortable with Chris's presence, while Peter is happy to meet him. Afterward, Peter has to leave for an unexpected business trip again. During that time, while Layla is at home with her son, she receives a message from Chris inviting her to dinner. She writes back, telling him that their relationship is over. As Layla sits with her son, she notices that he's wearing Chris's necklace, which makes her very upset. Suddenly, she notices Chris standing outside her window, which fills her with fear and anxiety. Afterward, her husband Peter returns from his trip and arranges a surprise dinner for Layla. But what angers Layla is that Peter invites Chris to join them for dinner, and it's clear that Layla is extremely tense. She goes to the bathroom, and Chris follows her, blackmailing her and threatening to kill her if she doesn't listen to him. At that moment, Layla confides in her friend about the problem she's in. Her friend promises to help and goes to Chris's house to spy on him. She does go there, but Chris discovers her presence in his house, beats her, and kills her. After that, he kidnaps Layla's son for a long period. The police search for Layla's friend, and when they find her, she's dead. At that moment, Layla realizes that Chris is the one who killed her friend, so she tells her husband Peter everything. Peter took her to Chris's house, hoping to find their son. When Layla arrived at Chris's house, he attacked them and started hitting her, but Peter saved her and struck Chris with a baseball bat. When Chris got up from the ground, he grabbed Layla and Peter's son and held a knife to his throat, threatening to kill him. Layla began begging him not to do it. As she moved toward him, Chris started seeing Layla as her friend whom he had killed, and he began hallucinating. At that moment, Layla took advantage of the situation, pulled out pepper spray from her pocket, and sprayed it into Chris's eyes. Chris fell to the ground, and the police arrived and arrested him. Layla finally managed to rid herself of this terrifying nightmare, feeling deep regret for betraying her husband. However, in the end, she saved herself and her family and returned to live peacefully again. And that's how our film ends. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to watch more videos that you're sure to enjoy.